Hello and welcome to It's Your Time You're Wasting, the second edition of the new millennium, I was going to say, which it isn't really a new millennium, is it?
It's a new era,
A
Martin.
new era, that's the word I'm
It's
looking
a new
for.
era, and we've already regressed because last week we'd worked out how to put our names under our pictures, and we've forgotten this week. So um, that does not bode well.
Well, we don't need it if we're going on to the podcasts world
No,
and things like
but the
that.
really exciting news that I want to share with you is that Martin's daughter has made some new artwork for the show. So, YouTube viewers, next week you might be treated to remind me, I can't forgotten her name.
I can't
You
possibly,
can't say. No, you can't say.
can't possibly out her from
Right.
here.
Apologies. Um, anyway, Junior Robinson.
Junior Robinson, there you go. Yeah, brilliant. So we're going to look at today. We're going to ask: is it worth it?
Is it various things? We're going to start off by thinking about whether universities are worth it, but we're going to get there through for a Sunday Times article or Times, not Sunday Times
Sunday
article.
Times?
You
Sunday
It
Times.
was Sunday Times.
Yeah.
Apologies to Rupert Murdoch and all he purveys. Yeah, a Times article which pulled up some Sutton Trust research, which was talking about the fact that 20% of children,
21%.
21%.
21% of Year 11 pupils in state schools last year received private tutoring during their 11th year. So, in other words,
A fifth.
a fair number. And if you think about it, that would
No,
probably
it is a
affect.
fifth.
It would certainly affect some
Slightly
schools.
over.
Some schools would be affected more than others,
Yeah, of course.
and
Yeah,
those schools who have more well-off students
absolutely.
would have higher than 21%. Those with poorer students would have lower than
It's not
21%.
cheap, private
It's,
tutoring.
no, and certainly if you're doing it in more than one subject, etc., etc., though you're probably aiming perhaps at
Have you ever
classics,
paid for
English,
a
and
private
maths.
tutor,
I
Martin?
have, yeah, yeah. Have
And how
you?
much did that cost?
I can't remember. I did it
No.
as well for a bit as well. I've actually
Did
done that.
you? Did
Yeah,
you? Yeah. Okay. Like away years and years ago, my wife ran a private tutoring agency locally,
there you go.
and she didn't make that much profit because she was paying the tutors too much of the cut. Whereas I think some of these big national agencies, they pay the tutors relatively small cut of the total take. Yeah, I know. Capitalism. What are you going to do?
The interesting thing,
But
yeah. So what comes out of this is when you're looking at. I know the government no longer says that league tables are a good idea, but basically every newspaper of a certain ilk runs its own league tables, and people can compare results online as well with and internal school data on teacher quality might as well have something going on there. But the way that we compare and contrast schools based on exam passes and things like that,
I
how
think
is it?
it's,
Are we actually comparing schools at all, or are we just generally looking at
are
those
we
who've got the
comparing
most support
tutors?
around them?
Well, so a story, a little anecdote from my fascinating life. Uh, a friend of mine is a retired chemist,
Right.
and a few years ago he started tutoring A-level chemistry. And one particular year, he tutored all of the students in the local school's A-level chemistry class because there were some parental concerns about the quality of teaching. But as maybe one might predict, the chemistry students who had experienced both the chemistry teaching at school and some chemistry tuition all went on to do very well in their chemistry A levels. And so the teacher, the school can say, wow, we're doing a really good job.
Yeah.
And maybe, maybe they are. Maybe the fact that maybe it's a coincidence, but it would it would be it'd be an unusual one, wouldn't it?
It would be. I mean, again, another story. I was working in the school that the so-called weakest teacher in the English department was getting the best results at GCSE, and it transpired because so many of the parents were getting private tutoring because she was the weakest teacher. But again, you just look at the black and white there, the figures there. You just say, "Oh, she must be doing something we're not sure about." And
I
you
think
know,
it leads to an important question whether whether the government are comparing schools, whether multi academy trusts are comparing the schools who are in their trusts, whether parents are comparing schools. I think it does. You're right to ask the question: what can we learn by looking at the published headline results? And I think that my take on this, and one of the things I often say when I'm working with schools, is that we should almost discount the results of the most advantaged students. The private tutoring aside, those children are likely to be successful despite what schools do. So even if you really stuff it up, they've got the wherewithal, whether it be the money to pay a tutor or just to have a dinner table conversation with their parents about their homework, to cope with the vagaries of school. Whereas if you're looking at the results of the most disadvantaged students, they're only likely, on average, to be successful if the school's getting it right. And so, certainly internally, I would always encourage a teacher or school to look at those students and their results to get a sense of whether or not what they're doing is effective.
yeah,
And
it's very difficult to pull that data out except on free school meals, I suppose. And
pupil
free
premium,
school
yeah,
meals data has changed
yeah,
recently because they've
yeah, and it's very
widened the number of
inexact.
people getting free school meals or something, haven't they?
It's
Quite
very
many million.
inexact, and obviously, you can set your own parameters within a school to look at that. And you can, as a teacher, you can see the children in your class, and you'll have a sense of which ones come from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, and you can make some draw some conclusions from that. But you're right; it's the pupil premium fee school meals is a very imperfect measure. There's lots potentially wrong with it, but it's a starting point
Yeah, I would say with a lot of data, of course, we need to look underneath what's happening to find out how
for
how
sure. Yeah,
how real
for
it
sure.
is. The other thing, of course, tutoring is used for is used at A level and
Yeah.
to get people, over that threshold into university entrance. And again, the advantage that those with a certain amount of money, but also the what's called social capital, I think, the wherewithal to get the right tutor to focus on the right courses, the right universities, or whatever it happens to be. Um, uh,
And this is obviously what a lot of private schools do without the tutoring. The extra private tutor, they're very good and knowledgeable about how to prep students for particular
Yeah,
universities.
can I pick you up on that? I think a lot of from what I've heard and what I've seen, a lot of private schools parents do get private tutoring on top of the private school they're paying for.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that isn't the case. I'm saying that the school themselves will do their own internal
Yeah,
tutoring to that
yeah,
effect.
and some state schools, to be fair, will do it as well.
Yeah,
Certainly for their
yeah.
Oxbridge candidates, or the Russell
Oxbridge
Group candidates,
candidates.
the
Yeah.
important kids.
The ones that matter.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, and it's, I mean, it speaks to perhaps a deeper philosophical problem about, why we have the exams that we have. So why do we, it seems that the main reason that we have A levels is for the convenience of universities.
yeah. I think it started with, of course, a lot of university exam boards, weren't there? The Oxford and Cambridge board, and it came from the A levels, etc., came from that. But now we've got to a point of 50% of kids,
Mm.
nearly 50% of kids going to university. Um, we get to a point: is it worth it? Is it worth going to university? Because the wages now for the lowest paid graduates, not the lowest, not the smallest graduates, the lowest paid graduates is
Yeah.
is approaching that of the the sorry. the lowest paid
This
non-graduate
is a
is
tough one to
approaching
get
that.
right, isn't
I
it?
know.
Let's take a run up at it, Martin.
The lowest non-graduates. Can we start
We'll get
again?
there.
I'm going to pour some cold water over my head and start again. So if you are a non-graduate, your pay
Right.
is approaching that of the lowest paid graduate. The highest paid non-graduates obviously is above that and is approaching the pay now of the highest paid graduates. So, there is less
There's less
room now for
disparity.
saying that there's,
Yeah.
what they call the advantage gap or something for going to university is
Yeah.
less than it used to be,
Yeah.
money wise.
There's various bits and bobs in there, aren't there? The idea, the suspicion that lots of people have that their plumber is far wealthier than they are is probably correct for a lot of people. That if you're running your own business, if you've got a skill which is very much in demand, you can make a lot of money. But that also, you've rather dirtied the whole business of going to university there, Martin, because is going to university a purely transactional affair? Is it about increasing one's earning potential, or is it about the love and pursuit of knowledge for its own sake? Now, of course, I'm being naive. It's no longer about that. The marketization of university degrees has sort of torpedoed any idea that the majority of students going to university are going because they they love the subject they're studying.
Yeah, it's
But
because
there are
you're charging people.
you're
You're
charging
charging people
people.
to go there on with student loans,
Yeah,
and so you've got a graduate tax or loan or whatever you want to call
yeah,
it. You're paying back at pretty high interest rates over a lifetime of work or a shortened amount of time depending how much you earn over that period of time. But you've got an added debt which other
yeah.
people who don't go to university do not have. So
No,
if the gap is narrowing, then it comes to a point that is it worth it? Is it worth
yeah,
it?
absolutely, absolutely, and I think that one of the other things to sort of throw into this, there's a lot of noise about art subjects disappearing from universities like from their faculties, and I think one of the real big problems there is that you're paying you play there's a flat fee for your university course, whether you're doing medicine or engineering or mathematics or history or literature or whatever it is that you're choosing to study. And if you are a medic, if you're studying medicine, the cost of your degree is obviously to the university is obviously far greater than the cost of an arts degree in terms of the equipment needed and the intensity of that. And typically, students who are studying arts programs, arts degrees, get far less tuition, far less contact time. And just to have a sort of personal, sort of parental gripe, my youngest daughter, who's at university in London, finished her tuition for the year at the end of March,
Mm.
which seems extraordinary that she's paying. We're paying for a year, and it can seem in terms of like the value, especially if you're thinking about earning potential and that kind of thing, that the value of degrees isn't equal
Mm.
in terms of, um, but also it would maybe there's something in there that universities are making more on these cheaper degrees.
They could indeed be. I mean, but you've got to also go into the number of universities that are cutting courses as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
They're
Yeah.
certainly looking at
So,
arts
and that
courses,
makes
arts.
sense, doesn't it? That you're a young person wanting to pay off your debt for the degree that you study. There's much more. It makes more logical sense to study a STEM subject
I don't.
because there's more quid pro quo in terms of the earning potential and the obvious vocational utility of the degree that you
It
do.
gets more complex than this because there are people. Let's say my own subject, drama, which is a unique case, shall we say, in lots of terms, but the people studying it are now tending to be the better off.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. So going into the arts has become a luxury
Yeah, it's a
for the most
luxury.
fortunate.
Yeah, so you're seeing a lot of more famous actors, etc., singers even, who are, shall we say, from a private school background, who've gone into the arts, whose
Yeah.
parents have subsidised them, or are able to subsidise them through the vagaries of the employment
Yeah.
that you have, especially in the early years. Um, yeah, it's become a posh
No,
place to
and that's
stay.
not to take away from the potential talent of your Cumberbatches or
No,
whatever,
that's right. Yeah,
but there are going to be lots and lots of talented actors, artists of various stripes who never get their chance
yeah.
because they can't afford to break in.
I was talking to someone at Eton. They said they had a pupil there every year has a chance of appearing in about 20 to 30 plays a year,
Wow.
whereas in a state school, it's lucky if they get in one, and also with that, if they are not able to get into that one play, perhaps, that's their career gone. They never think of doing it. Perhaps the subject has been taken out of over, I think, 50% of schools now. State schools don't do drama, nearly around that figure. That's the
Are
GCSE.
you?
It's
Do
crazy.
you have any hope or optimism that the curriculum review is going to redress that?
I have hope.
Right. Right. Okay. Is hope triumphing over experience? I
You
wonder.
never know.
Okay. So
You
are
never know.
universities worth it? Maybe not in financial terms. Maybe they're not worth it.
And
If
that's
you're
been
going to
it's
university in the hope that you're going to have a better, higher paying job, maybe they're not worth it.
and if you're going to send 50% of children, students, to university rather than used to be 7% when I was a kid, um, supply and
All those
demand.
years ago.
Yeah, all those years ago, supply and demand is going to say, that this
Mm.
becomes a lesser thing to sell. And we've got a skills shortage as well. So plumbers, brickies, etc., have perhaps a higher earning potential as well because there's fewer of them. So, you can see it in old simplistic economic terms, I suppose.
So the first of our worth it's maybe not. We're also talking about whether it's worth it to use a particular pedagogical strategy that's had a bit of heat and light this week on social media, and that is Doug Lemov's coinage, cold call, um, that that I think, if I'm going to be paraphrasing here. Martin can check me, but it's essentially asking questions of children who don't have their hands up, targeting
Yeah,
questions of children, regardless of whether or not they have volunteered to answer the question.
it's as it says here, cold call.
Call, call.
Cold call. In order to make engaged participation the expectation. Sorry, I'll start again. In order to make
Oh
engaged
my goodness!
participation the expectation, call on students regardless of whether they have raised their hands.
Right,
So,
and this is something. I mean, that was first published. Was it 2010
oh God,
that Teach Like a
you're
Champion
really
first
asking
came
me
out?
now.
It's older. It's been around longer than you think. I think it didn't sort of penetrate into English education until a good few years later than that.
2010. Very good. No,
There
hang
you
on. Oh no,
go.
Doug Lemoff, 1967 too. That's his birth
Yeah,
date,
yeah. No,
isn't it?
look, you're getting confused there, Martin.
Why has he got his birth date in there?
I
Anyway,
don't know. I don't know. Let's not worry about that. So yeah, so before that, I certainly, and I'm sure you did too, Martin, encountered the idea that we should not just ask questions of children with their hands up. I remember Dylan William used to talk quite a lot about this in the training that he did, and there was various moves to have things like randomized pupil generators, where like lolly sticks. Do you remember lolly sticks? Which I always thought was a bit of a silly idea because
very silly.
Very silly. Let's not get in. Well, should we get into lolly stick? Why are lolly sticks silly, Martin?
Well, because I mean, it was this idea of it to make the pupils think it isn't unfair that they're being
Right.
picked out, and that you would throw away the lolly stick when you've used it. So by the end of the week, everyone would have been used. I suppose the people who hadn't been used by the end of the week was starting to get more terrified of going in because they're going to be picked. I don't know how. And also then marking on your register if you've asked a question to one, etc., etc. I mean, can I say I think that in most classrooms that you can do this without making a big thing of it. You can ask questions of kids, and kids answer questions. There is something very oddly mechanical about these tricks that people bring into
Mm.
it. So asking kids questions has been an age-old thing.
It
But
has.
but it was this thing about the enthusiastic kid and those who want to answer that becomes the problem, wasn't
The
it? Because
Hermione Grangers of this world.
yeah, because I want to answer, and then getting caught up in the enthusiastic kids and the ones who are sitting back a bit, perhaps slightly nervous, slightly not wanting to take part, or do want to take part but don't feel
Yeah.
engaged in that way. It becomes a problem for them. So you can see where it comes from. You can see
Yeah, no,
the reason for it.
absolutely. And I think there are two things going on here. One of which is arguably it's good for children to articulate answers
Mm,
that they will learn more and get more out of the lesson experience if they participate in answering questions. That's one hand. So if as a teacher we're allowing some children to not do that, then maybe that's not fair or not right or a bad thing in some respects. So they've got that on the one hand, and on the other hand, and I see this an awful lot of teachers asking a question. Somebody puts their hand up and answers the question, and the teacher then behaves as if that means everybody's understood the crucial learning point they've tried to teach, and they move on. And very often I've been sitting at the back of classrooms and I say to the student next to me, what was the answer? What was just said? What just happened? And they'll go, don't know, wasn't listening. And and so it's a very, very poor signal for teachers. And so in terms of that assessment for learning agenda, it doesn't it doesn't give the teacher very good feedback about the effectiveness of their teaching.
mm. What and this is why no hands up became quite a big thing. I think in the 90s
Yeah.
to the noughties or whatever, no hands up. And then the import, I will call it import of the American teach like a
Cold call.
champion. Cold call became, I think it's basically the same thing.
Well, I think in the latest iteration of Teach Like a Champion 3.0, I think there's something like 11 pages on cold call. There are a lot of different variations. You can have no hands up cold call, all hands up cold call, warm call. There's all sorts of nuances that come under this umbrella term, and but what has happened is that the phrase has now, I think, largely replaced in the teacher lexicon the idea of, whatever language we might have used before, like no hands up or whatever it was. There's a belief that we're all meaning the same thing when we use the term cold call.
Right. I mean,
We all think we know what it
I
means, and
don't like the term cold call. I mean, I used
lots
it
of people
myself.
don't, Martin.
I
You are
used
not alone.
No, but I used it myself as a double glazing salesman when I first left
Right.
school back in the early 80s,
Yeah.
and knocking
I've
on
I've
doors.
I've had a terrible telesales job where I'd be cold calling people.
This is it. And
Yeah.
because of that, it's got a hard edge. It's slightly conning them as well. There's that sort of very odd. It is. You're going in to knock on someone's door, and
Yeah. Right, right, right.
by the end of the day, you've come out with £8,000 worth of double glazing.
Devil glazing that you didn't need or want. Thanks very much, Mr. Robinson.
So there's that strange sort of thing. So I object to the term. It's perhaps it works better in an American setting than it does
I
for
don't. I mean,
my English
honestly, I
sensitivities.
don't care about that. I'm
I
not,
do. I do.
I
It
know
matters.
what you mean, but I think that firstly, we've got to the point where very few teachers, when they hear or say cold call, are thinking about double glazing salesmen. And secondly, I don't think it's I don't think it's that common for teachers to say in a classroom, "I am now going to cold call."
No, it's not the one you'd want to share with people. You would say, "I'm going to ask questions. Don't worry about hands up, things like that." But you call it warm call. Go on to warm call. What the
Oh,
hell's
so
that?
well, okay. So in terms of the idea that you ask a question of somebody who might not know the answer, sometimes gets some criticism, doesn't it? That this is a mean thing to do, and kids get anxious, and therefore teachers shouldn't do it. And there's an idea, and I think it's probably borne out by real instances of teachers being, a bit on the mean side with their expectations. So the sort of thing that I would do in a lesson is, I would, for instance, I'd tell the children something, and I might then say, what did I just say, Martin? And my expectation would be that you ought to be able to tell me what I just said, but maybe I suspect that you might not be able to
I
tell
can't.
me. You can't. You've no idea. And then in that instance, I might say, Martin, I need you to listen really carefully. I'm going to go to another student. I'm going to ask them the same question, and then I'm going to get you to repeat the answer. And that, for me, seems a reasonable thing, a reasonable expectation for a teacher to have, that students are listening to what's going on. When I want to check that they've understood something, or I've taught them something a bit gnarly and knotty, and I've dropped a load of information in, and I want to take a little pause to see, like, does everyone get it? Saying, right, okay, I've just taught you about, I don't know, the divine right of kings. Martin, what is it? Very easy for you to go, even if you do have an inkling. Being cold in that way is probably really unhelpful to all concerned. So warming students up by saying, okay, what I'm going to get, the way I would typically do it is to say, okay, I'm going to get you to, I've just taught you about the divine right of kings. I want everybody on their mini whiteboard to jot down 3 things they think they know about the divine right of kings. And then I'm going to put you into a talk partnership just to discuss what you came up with, so that you're all ready to give an answer, so that when I call on you to tell me what you think it is, you shouldn't be feeling anxious. You should have something.
Yeah,
And
I
then
would
I'd be
call
going
that
around.
whole thing, to me, sounds more like what was also called, or I called, the conversational classroom, the classroom where, rather than this sort of bang cold calling, right, you're doing this and very quickly, right, everyone's hands up, right, you're going to ask you, right, bang bang bang, and very quick, and but a more conversational, more relaxed, and more involving particularly
Yeah.
for kids who are perhaps introverted, or do have various learning difficulties, or mental health issues, or whatever. How do you make them more
Yeah.
part of something? Isn't it more conversational, more inclusive, more,
It's interesting, isn't it? I remember years ago, teacher, I had 2 children in one class. This was in about, I don't know, like 2004 or something, years ago. And they were both elective mutes. And having 2 in the same class was sort of a bit astonishing. And and that was, that obviously that presents a real challenge to a teacher, that if you can ask them questions, but they're not going to say anything in response. And I remember that one of them was a boy and one of them was a girl, and the boy, he would talk to other people in the class, but he wouldn't talk to me. And he would whisper, and sometimes, he'd whisper inappropriately. And I used to say to him, okay, I've got a question, whisper the answer to the lad sat next to you. And he'd whisper it away. And I'd say, what did he say? And he'd tell me what the other chap had said,
Mm.
and I'd go, "All right, that's really interesting, thank you." And there are, I mean, that didn't work with the other elective mute student in the class, so it's not a panacea, obviously. But I think there are ways. So that's one of the ways around that kind of issue is doing things like using mini whiteboards,
Yeah.
where there's far less threat and challenge in terms of participation, so you can see what everyone's thinking about something in quite a quick way. But I think a lot of teachers, I think, talk about the idea that more and more there are students who they are briefed, don't ask them questions.
Mm.
Or families might get in touch with schools to say, yeah, don't ask my son or daughter questions. That's they don't like that. And it's a really interesting, if it's right, if it's true that asking questions increases your understanding of what's being taught. Answering questions, sorry, being asked and answering, having to articulate the answers. If that does increase your learning, then being asked to deliberately reduce the quality of the interaction for certain students, maybe who need it most, is quite an odd thing to happen.
Yeah, it shows there's something going on there
Yeah, it does.
that is actually not creating the atmosphere that the kids could do with. I think kids
Mm.
do like talking about stuff they're involved in. Now we talk about lessons they're not involved in is perhaps a
Yeah, yeah.
different thing, but there are ways of getting kids involved in the majority of lessons. Um, but there are things that people, I mean, the classic one's maths anxiety, but I can also promise you there's such a thing
Yeah.
as drama anxiety. It's called
Oh,
stage fright, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I expect it's in most lessons where you're
Well, I
not
think, the classic thing
in a
in an
safe
English
spot.
lesson is that student is terrified of reading aloud and being asked to read
Yeah,
aloud.
yeah. So how to make it a safe space as people use it in the opposite parlance of these things, but
Yeah,
actually a safe space in which to discuss and creating that atmosphere is quite important.
yeah. I think that one of the things that I've thought a lot about over the years is what to do when students say, "I don't know,"
Mm.
because that can be a real snooker move for teachers. The you it's certain there are times when we've had we've all experienced where students say, "I don't know," and you suspect that they do know, they just can't be bothered. But there's no percentage in going, "Yes, you do," and haranguing them. That's never going to pay off particularly well. Sorry, my dog's growling about something.
That's right.
Um,
It's good to
but
have.
uh, but I think removing "I don't know" as an excuse is part of the reason that I'd go through that process of saying, what I'm asking you is what's just happened, not
Mm.
for some sort of deep original thought.
Yeah,
So
it's different. Is it
I'm
different?
going to remove you not knowing. I'm going to
Mm.
I'm going to provide the answer and come back to you and say what happened.
Mm. Where do we go from
So
here?
that
It's different contexts and different moments, but yeah. So
so you don't like cold call.
I don't like the
You're not
term.
a fan.
I'm quite happy to have a conversational classroom where everyone's included within it,
Yeah.
and there are techniques to make that happen. Now it might be that's the same thing.
It might be that's the same thing, and maybe you're just worried about the nomenclature. I think the other thing is that formularizing some of these things that we've become expert on over the years is very good for novice teachers. When
Yeah,
I was a novice teacher, I didn't know any of this stuff.
yeah.
I fell into every trap imaginable. Would I have been better off if someone had given me some training on cold call?
It's an
Maybe,
interesting thing you
probably.
say about that, though. I mean, how much drift is allowed these days with people saying, right, this is what it means. This is
Yeah.
exactly it. Right. And over the years, I've become expert at using it
Well,
in my way, but it's slightly different than the classroom next door and the classroom next door. I get the impression these days that that's not so well thought of, to be
yeah,
slightly
I think
different
I
from
think
that.
that because it's there are people who treat Duglamov's writing as canonical,
Mm.
and that anyone who deviates from anything that he's written is somehow doing a disservice to the wider education community. And I certainly have fallen afoul of that recently, where I've got into discussions with people who's going, "Wow, clearly you've not read the book," and Dean, it's not an unreasonable thing. Like, if there is an agreed definition, and I'm choosing to use the term for which there is a definition, should I know what that is? Arguably, yes. And
But
if
if
I
there are
don't,
11 pages, if there are 11
yeah,
pages of
exactly.
it, it's going to be
11
very,
pages
and then
that
three
all
different
teachers should be
editions.
tested on.
Yeah.
So what the decision that I've come to is that it's probably better for everyone if I don't say cold call.
Conversational
Not,
classrooms. Here we go. I'm gonna
what I've
copyright that.
decided is that, because I think it's sort of marrying it to the different purposes of the way I ask questions, is that I've got attention checking, which is, as we've discussed, and then sense making to check on whether children have understood what's going on and how they've turned it into something meaningful for themselves. And I feel that those are quite different transactional approaches, both of which involve not, asking questions of children even if they don't have their hands up. So they have that in common. But if people are going to get annoyed by me not using Doug Lamov's definition, then it's probably easier for me not to do it. But what of, Martin? What of those people who say the whole thing's cruel and unusual? Hey, Martin, leave those kids alone.
That's it. Leave those kids alone. And I don't think. I mean, in the end, you just say, well, why have them in the classroom at the point? And these days, we know more and more kids are opting out of going even into schools.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different issue, perhaps, and perhaps one we could talk about at another point.
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
another
Absolutely.
episode.
Anyway, is cold call, is it worth it?
And finally, is it worth schools showing 4 episodes of Adolescence, the Netflix hit series?
Yeah. When are they going to do it? In PHSE lessons, in
PHSC lessons,
assembly.
which are notoriously always free.
Yeah.
Never other things going on there, like emergency assemblies or
No.
or having to sort out reports, etc., etc.
Yeah.
The admin of
The
those
government's done a
assemblies.
deal with Netflix to have it freely available to schools, haven't they?
They've done that, right? I mean, I can't.
Tia
I
loves
think
it.
you would actually be better off if you wanted to talk about the issues and raise the issues in Adolescence, not showing the 4 episodes of Adolescence and using that
Well,
4 or so hours
it's almost
to
like
talk about
you
the
should
issues.
have a PHSE curriculum.
Exactly, yes. And should it be on the PSHE curriculum? And if so, what should be taken out? And what exactly do you want to talk about in the PHSE curriculum? Because the show itself is far more complex and interesting as a work of art than a lot of the discussions that have come from it, which have seemed to be very narrowed and focused on certain things.
Well, hang on, Martin. I remember reading that it's been debunked.
But of course, it's been debunked. I mean, this is because, as soon as you
That
fly
was
the
a
flag and
Spiked
say,
article, wasn't it? That some contrarian said, I've disproved a drama.
yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, really. This is the trouble with people sort of treating it in. I mean, even Keir Starmer sort of every now and then calls it a documentary, I think, which hasn't necessarily helped the cause.
It's a Rorschach blocked, isn't it? We're all seeing whatever we want to see in it, maybe.
This is it, and a drama is a drama, and should be talked about in terms of a drama, not like it's some sort of great insight into the truth. And this is there are a variety of truths there, which we can argue about, and we can say, well, this is what this episode was about. The school episode is particularly controversial. As
Yes, it
Tom
is.
Bennett has actually said, it's very realistic, and there are schools like this. Whereas when I
And
first saw it, I actually felt this, and I can imagine if you're a child psychologist, a policeman, a lawyer, or whatever you are watching it, you'll be saying it's really good. But the episode where people like me featured, it wasn't quite accurate enough.
Yeah. Lots of teachers have felt a little bit aerated by episode 2, and I read an interesting piece by the actor that plays Mr. Malik, the teacher, the history teacher, who's like, yeah, whatever, what can you do about these fucking kids or something like that, and he says, yeah, well, that was my experience of school. That was how I found teachers. That
Mm.
was that feels pretty realistic to me. And I think the difficulty is that there's a wide variety of differing qualities of education in different schools, and even within different schools. So I think it's perfectly possible for two children to go to the same school and have incredibly different experiences of what it's like in that school. And there is no doubt that many children have a very sad experience of school and feel very marginalized and excluded by their journey through it.
It's interesting you
And
talk about Mr. Malik saying the actor playing Mr.
yeah,
Malik,
yeah,
who I
I
can't
can't remember his name.
no,
Yeah,
like he's talking about the time when he was at school, which is of course
exactly.
all our memories of when we were at, or our experience of, and this is how dramas are made. These
Everyone's been to school. Everyone's an expert.
it can't represent every school. It represents the
No,
school in this drama, and that's
no,
as
and
best it can do.
and does it dramatize a version of reality that many people will recognize? Yeah, it probably does.
Mm,
Is it an objective reality that describes every school in the country? Of course not.
no, and but there is one interesting thing to me. This idea of playing 4 episodes of this in order to teach kids about the dangers of online misogyny,
Yeah,
etc., which is a very small part of those 4 episodes and is mentioned in passing. I think Andrew Tate gets mentioned once
yeah.
in passing.
Emojis were a
The
key
the
plot point, weren't they?
yeah, the what? Sorry.
Emojis, Martin.
Yes, the emojis thing, yeah, and things like that. Yeah, the translation of emojis and all that. The thing is, it's not. You could show snippets by all means to get conversation going. The experts actually of what kids are watching online are the kids in your class.
Yeah, yeah,
There's your that,
I know.
and again we go back to classroom conversations, and getting
Yeah,
getting that going is because they can tell you, and if you've got the atmosphere of openness in a classroom to be actually able to bring that out of them and to get them to articulate what they're seeing, and in a trusting atmosphere, which I think some of them will find very challenging and quite difficult to talk about what they're seeing for obvious
yeah,
reasons. um, it would actually help more than just showing them stuff and telling them stuff.
yeah. Of course. Is it worth 4 hours of curriculum time to show children a Netflix drama? No, it just isn't. And there we are. That's on that bombshell. Um, but it just isn't, is it? Is it worth showing it to teachers, Martin?
I think again you could give it to them for homework, couldn't you?
Yeah, homework.
Because probably if you've actually sat through watching it on Netflix and then you go into your first staff meeting and it's 4 hours of Netflix
Yeah,
program to watch.
goodness. Can you imagine? It's probably better than some of the inset I've experienced. Um, but I suppose one of the things that it connects with is we've got the head of the oh my goodness, I've forgotten what the
NEU.
NEU. They will change their name. Daniel Kebede saying that the government really need to ban mobile phones. I saw
From
an
school.
exchange
From
this
school.
morning from school, not like in the world.
Yeah, well, it's
But-
important.
no, and this is following I think a real groundswell of public opinion following the publication of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which it's certainly having a big splash in the States.
Hmm.
I was in New York recently, and lots of people talking in schools about Jonathan Haidt and whether mobile phones should be banned and phone pouches and all this sort of thing. And I think we and many schools in England are ahead of the curve. The data would seem to show that a, a clear majority of schools restrict phone usage in some way. I saw a really interesting exchange on Twitter this morning between Sir David Carter, the previous Regional Schools Commissioner, and Stuart Locke, CEO of Multi Academy Trust, about whether David's initial position was no, the government shouldn't ban mobile phones. This is a matter for school leaders, and Stuart's position was, well, if we're agreed that banning mobile phones from schools is a good idea, and we've got 23,000 schools, would it be better to have one ban than 23,000 bans? Would it make it easier for school leaders to have those conversations with families and students if it against a national backdrop? And very rarely for Twitter exchanges, David Carter said, "Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that," which I thought was lovely.
Mm.
But what's your take on this, Martin?
Yeah, I think it,
Is it
if
worth it banning mobile phones from schools?
if it is a governmental initiative to say no schools should have mobile phones, then you can imagine that one moment when somebody in a school wants them to bring in a mobile phone to film something. There might be, whether it be their drama.
Yeah,
Sometimes kids in drama do film their work to show each other, to look at it, see if it works, to
yeah.
show each other what they're actually doing on stage, things like that. Or if they're using them to make a media project, or you can see how
Hmm.
a blanket ban might, in these very small few occasions, and you say, well, they could use cameras, but these days schools are starved of technology, a lot of schools. And if they have
They're
the
not
technology,
resource
it
rich.
probably doesn't work, or whatever. There's so many
Mm.
things there. And of course, not every kid has a mobile phone or a good phone, but, within reason. So I can see a central diktat. Once it's done, then people say, hang on a minute, what about this? And these very small issues will become bigger than they are. To me, it's if the government's going to do any banning, it's the sort of thing that said, well, if it's not good at school for these reasons, then those reasons don't go away on the trip to school and the trip from
No,
school. They don't
yeah,
go away at being at home. And if you're spending 8 hours, every day on your phone, and those 8 hours are now in the evening or the morning, or wherever they happen to be, um, then that should be more. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember going to a newsagents. Do you remember those things? Newsagents as a kid,
I do.
to look at
To buy a
whatever,
vape,
a
is it,
comic or
Martin?
something like that, and then I looked at the top shelf,
I
and
bet you did.
reached up to the top shelf to have a look at these strange magazines that a foreign world. I must have
Could
been
you
about
even
11
reach
years
it?
old, and the newsagent came from behind the counter and hit me.
Brilliant.
And put it back up there and said, "Not for you."
Yeah, brilliant.
But now the
Yeah, yeah,
material
of course. There's no
on the internet,
newsagent to hit kids on the back of the head. They're looking at top shelf magazines in the privacy of
far
their own
worse
bedroom
than, and far
via their
more
mobile
explicit and
phone.
far more damaging, and
Yeah,
not just in terms of pornography. Then, of course, all the other things they can
yeah,
access on the internet.
absolutely. And yeah, there's
We
lots
still,
of
sorry, I'm going to say this now as well. We even censor films still at the cinema. It's
yeah.
a joke.
Well, yeah. So what are you saying? Do we need to have wider legislation against social media?
If you are against certain things, then just to banning it in schools is not going to make the blindest bit of difference. It's going
Right.
to irritate a couple of teachers and kids at some point. Yes, schools can have their own bans, and then can be adaptable should they need to be so for certain things. If you actually think that phones are doing harm in society, then you really ought to look at 16, 18, or what I think in Australia they're looking at banning up to 16. Um, certain sites, or
Yeah.
phones themselves, and I think that makes more sense. Though
Yeah.
closing the stable door after the horse has bolted and all those things is,
Well,
of course, very difficult.
that our understanding of ideas always lags behind
Mm.
their availability, doesn't it?
And the Jonathan Haidt
Um,
book, I mean, it's a good book, but how much evidence have we got that it's right and not just some
yeah,
sort
well,
of, is it all correlation we're looking at?
I was reading some a piece by David Aronovich, basically saying none of it is right,
Okay.
and that the great rewiring that Haidt talks about is, the latest line in many greats, that that we've been sort of pronouncing the doom of civilization
For
for
years,
many years,
centuries.
with video games and television and radio and all the rest of it, and it's never come about. I think I think that for me, the most sort of the first instance I'm aware of someone sort of pronouncing the doom of civilization through technology is Socrates. Um,
You remember
in
him?
Yeah, you remember him in the Phaedra, talking about the fact that reading is going to destroy our ability to hold things in our memory, and and it democratizes knowledge in an unhelpful way, and like any fool can pick up a book
He
and
wasn't
give the
wrong.
appearance of knowing something, and he wasn't wrong. It really it has completely, in Haidt's terms, that the book, the printed word, did rewire our brain. We did, as a culture, lose the ability to memorize in the way that perhaps people had possessed it before, and that has had a permanent, maybe, effect on society. And so there is a precursor for this, and I think I definitely think the smartphone plus social media is the biggest change in
Mm,
my lifetime to the way in which lives are lived.
mm,
They're certainly the most obvious, and I think it's, anecdotally, pretty much everyone you talk to will admit to reading far less in the last 10 to
mm.
15 years, and
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 focusing for a long period of time, being able to focus on something without
yeah,
getting that. Oh, I'll just check my phone.
yeah.
I mean, I was at the opera. I was at the opera last night.
Of course you were.
Of course, I was.
What were you
And
seeing?
and Carmen.
Nice.
And at every interval, the phones
Yeah.
come out. And people checking things. And
Yeah.
you're not discussing the opera. You're not being with the people you're with. You're being in the same space, but
Yeah.
you're not communicating. You're not having that quality
No.
time.
A modern malaise, Martin.
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? Let's go back. Go back.
Mobile phones, are they worth it? Are they worth it?
There you go.
More harm than good, more good than harm.
Most people watch this show on their mobile phone than any other medium.
Yeah, they're not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the damning evidence, if anything is
Yeah.
needed.
Well, they're literally wasting their time,
Wasting
aren't
their
they?
time.
So,
Fabulous.
on that note, thank you very much for tuning in to It's Your Time You're Wasting. As said at the beginning, next time there should be special graphics
And a podcast. We hope to
and a
be on
podcast.
podcast.
Yeah, we're not very technically savvy,
Let's aim for it. Let's aim.
but
Aim high.
we're going to look it up on our mobile phones to find out how to do it. But thanks ever so much. See you soon.
Ta-ra.